Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and when they announced the Sonic Generations remake, I wasn't sure if I would pick it up. I still have the original and a working PS3, so it seemed kinda redundant. Sure, they said they were adding in some extra levels for Shadow, but it'd probably be like 3 or something I could clear in an hour. Well, it came out, I wound up getting it, and there was a lot more there than I was expecting. There's enough there that I feel like talking about it, though I normally do retro reviews, so how much should I talk about? If I tell you that Wily's actually the main villain of Mega Man 6, no one's gonna bat an eye, but if I talk too in depth about what goes on in this game, I could end up spoiling something, even if I am a week late to the party. Guess I'll try to keep the big stuff secret and not go as in depth as I normally do, but as a warning, I will be going over some mechanics, showing most of the stages, though I'll refrain from naming them, and the 3 main bosses. Timestamps will be up if you want to skip, or you can always just come back later after you've played it. Or you can just jump right to the part where I recommend it or not. If you're wondering how Shadow plays, it's pretty similar to Sonic in the base game, just a lot more. He can run, jump, boost, and teleport to enemies to deliver a kick, similar to the homing attack. He also has a pretty slow startup speed, which you can bypass with the boost, but it can feel like going from 0 to 100, so sometimes you really gotta consider your situation before doing so. As for what's extra, he's got his Chaos Spear as a projectile to stun enemies and activate switches, a double jump, and also Chaos Control, which stops time for a short period. And you really want to be using this. I would always hold on to mine until I knew I needed it, but normally if it is required, the game will give you a refill right before, and Chaos Control also stops not just in-game time, but time elapsed as well. Given that that's how your rank is determined, using it often rather than sparingly can do a lot to improve your score. In addition to that, as you play through the game, you unlock more abilities for Shadow, letting him target more things at once with his Chaos Spears, pull off DBZ moves, and actually surf over water on a wicked-looking manta ray. That last one could really screw with me since, in a lot of the 3D Sonic games, falling in the water means death, so just jumping right in and then coasting along went against my survival instinct. There's a few others I won't mention other than to say that the last is kinda the fill-in for the typical super form, and leave you to wonder what exactly that means in this instance. All of them add a lot to the gameplay and help distinguish him from Sonic. In Adventure 2, they played exactly the same, other than Shadow having less upgrades due to less levels. In Shadow the Hedgehog, he had a gun and a motorcycle, and as much as people like making jokes about it, not too many liked playing it. In 06 they tried again, and I think we all know how that went over, not that it was his fault. And in Forces, I think he just kind of had a different character model, otherwise he was identical. Here though, they make him unique in not just how he fights, but also in the abilities he has access to, making his campaign a lot different and more than just Sonic Generations, but black and red with different levels. I'm really curious if they'll let Shadow keep any or all of these. While the whole darkness mutation thing feels a little heavy and serious for a game about a cartoon hedgehog, that's also kind of on brand for the Sonic series, especially when it comes to Shadow. If they wanted to continue with this going forward, I think it'd be a good way to avoid Shadow seeming like just a recolor. Let's start with the bad thing when it comes to Shadow's stages. He's been in far fewer games than Sonic has, giving him less to pull from. On the plus side though, he's able to use games that came out after the original generations, which helped supplement this a little. What? Did I say something weird? Oh, when I use loaded terms like good thing, bad thing, you probably want to know how they actually play. Well, the games that this pulls from are Adventure 2, Heroes, 06, Forces, and Frontiers. That's right, despite what I said, he actually uses one game he didn't appear in. At least not that I remember. But hey, Frontiers is the latest title, and it went over pretty well, so it makes sense that they'd want to use it. Strangely enough, unless I'm forgetting something, I don't think that there's a level from Shadow the Hedgehog. But since I think they reused some locations from Adventure 2, maybe they counted one of the 2 from there. Anyway, each stage has 2 acts, Act 1 being a typical 3D stage, and 2 usually being a 2D platformer, similar to how things are divided up in the main game. As for how the stages are, I'd say each one is either just as good or better than the source material. Each takes gimmicks from the original versions and remixes it in a way that works well with both gameplay styles. I'd say the stages here are a bit longer than the ones in Sonic Generations, but there's still only 6 of them, so they did the thing I was dreading and added in challenge stages. After clearing out each stage, you head to a boss door, and the challenges are opened up. There's 2 for each act, and you need to complete both to claim the key, and while you might not need all of them right away, you will by the end, meaning none of them are optional. In Sonic Generations, this felt almost like padding since, while I don't mind some extra optional challenges to get some value out of the game, they would always interrupt the pace and have me go from slamming through levels to having to complete either a dumb minigame or a reused section of stage but with a wrench thrown in, when I was really just itching to go up against the boss. Surprisingly though, despite my fears and them arguably making it more of a chore, I didn't mind the challenge stages here. Each one, while borrowing the location, had a new layout and it felt like a good test of your skills, rather than some new mechanic that you're never going to use again, or just more of what you've already done. Most of them felt very engaging, and I kinda want to go back and try both the main stages and challenges again, for better scores and collectibles. If I had one complaint, it's that I find it a little annoying that you need to touch the boss door to activate them. While you can warp to stages, that's only after you've cleared them. So that means going to the boss door, quick traveling to where you want to go, then hoofing it back once you're done. Which feels like an extra step, but when you've gotten there once, it doesn't take too long to get back, so it's a pretty minor gripe. That does bring up something I probably should have mentioned earlier though, the hub world. It's kinda like the one in Sonic Generations, but in 3D, which oddly enough feels easier to navigate. A big part of it's that you have more control over the camera, making it easier to scope out a path, which makes the way to get to some of the challenge gates less obtuse. This is also where you learn most of your moves, use the collectibles you get from stages to open up chests for gallery items, and also collect bolts and the like to do something. Still working on that. There's also a few challenges where you collect rings, pop balloons, or grab timers for more gallery stuff, and it's also a good place to test out some of your traversal powers, like the Mana Ray. There's a lot to explore, and you can spend a long time screwing around here. Overall, I'd say that the stage design is pretty on point. While I could say that they had some pretty good inspiration, given that they were also pulling from games like 06, they don't just copy-paste, but manage to elevate the source material in a lot of the cases. For the bosses, there's only 4 of them, but they all manage to be pretty big spectacles, which is probably why there's so many YouTube thumbnails with them in. Knew who I was going to fight before I went in, but hey, with all of them being revisits, there wasn't anything too surprising here. They start you off with the Bio Lizard, which I think was probably the most hyped up of the boss fights, so I would have thought that they'd want to save it for later, but since each encounter is based largely around what abilities you've collected so far, I suppose they did need to be in a specific order. Anyway, while it starts off pretty much the same as Adventure 2, after that first hit, things changed up significantly, which threw me for a bit of a loop. While I still beat it in 1, when you think you know how to do something only for things to deviate significantly, it can really disorient you, but hey, it was still a really good fight. After that, you get Metal Overlord, which is probably the messiest battle, you needing to crash into things to send them back, there being some weird timing on some of the attacks, and just overall there being a lot to process. While I still enjoyed it, he was probably my least favorite of the trio. Mephiles was interesting because while I played 06, I never beat it and I don't think I ever got to this battle, so going up against him here felt like I had finally gotten to experience something I had missed out on. In addition to that, it made good use of a mechanic that I wasn't the fondest of in the regular stages, and he had a good bit of variety in his different phases, so a very fun fight. The final boss I won't spoil, other than to say that if you make some educated guesses, you can probably get about 75% of the way there. All the fights are super exciting and well put together. Most importantly of all though, they're fun and something to look forward to in between sets of levels. I think the game looks really nice. The newer locations and enemies match up pretty well or better, and it's a treat to see some of the older stuff with modern graphics. The cutscenes look especially spiffy, and sometimes I'll notice textures that they didn't really need to bother with, like the threads on Shadow's gloves. Had they just been smooth Mickey Mouse gloves, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. I still bring it up though, since such extra detail gives me the impression that a lot of effort went into it. Don't have too much to say on the sound effects. You get the ones you'd expect from Sonic, which still work, so why change them? As for the music, it's Sonic, so it's good. Each stage you get a modern remix of the original track for Act 1 and a more retro-sounding one for Act 2. I really like game soundtracks and remixes, so this is right up my alley, and other fans of the series should be equally pleased. Well, I will admit that the Frontiers tracks feel a little weak, reminding me of Mega Man 11, but hey, I don't really remember much of the music from that game anyway. Other than the boss themes. But hey, that reminds me. You can unlock other tracks and set them to play before entering a level, so if there are any that you aren't really feeling, you do have options. But yeah, the OST rules. As for the story, they do a lot with it. You get the cutscenes, which are well voice acted, but Sega also put out a series of animations before the release, building up to the game, and there's even a quick summary of Shadow's history that you can select from the main menu to get you up to speed. Wish a bit more of this was in the game though. It not really having as many character interactions as I wanted, but I found out afterwards that I should have been talking to everyone several times in between major events to fill in some of the gaps. My bad, I thought I'd just be treated to the typical inane NPC dialogue. So yeah, they did include what I wanted, just in a way that didn't interfere too much with the main game, in case you're only here for the action. Another thing I kinda like is that they do throw in a few points that connect this campaign to the main one, rather than let it be an alternative telling, a side thing, or completely unrelated, making both feel important and part of a larger narrative. Wasn't really expecting much, so it pulled this off and made me wish I had gotten more, though it turned out I had just missed stuff. Still though, if I was originally ready to complain about it, it does indicate that I was invested. When it comes to difficulty, I think I can safely say that this is harder than Sonic Generations. In that, I was constantly getting A's and S's without even trying, but here, B's, C's, and even a few D's were more the norm. Of course, I played the main game before, which might be a part of it, but from what I've seen elsewhere, some of the required times are really tight, to the point where you need to be pretty much perfect, hitting every shortcut in stages and nailing every attack opportunity for bosses, or very nearly. Shadow also has a lot more abilities than Sonic, and that can lead to some more complex sequences, not just being able to homing attack across gaps, but sometimes having to stun an enemy mid-air before you can dash into them, or using Chaos Control to hold something in place so that you can move over it, but not accidentally using it to freeze something that you need to move. And that final power, yeesh. Using it too early or too late can really screw you. The levels can also be pretty complex, and I'm not just talking layouts. There's some that go full Doctor Strange on you. Buildings coming out of the sky, the floor becoming the ceiling, and you sometimes running upside down. All of it kind of reminds me of how much I miss Infinite. Really wish they had thrown in one more boss battle for him here, but when it comes to the reality warping stuff, I do have to admit that they pull it off a lot better in this one. You get a few thrown in here and there, but endgame, they get really topsy-turvy and hard to keep track of. While I won't sit here and pretend that there weren't a lot of stupid deaths throughout the playthrough, I was dying left and right as I tried to figure out exactly what path I was meant to take. I didn't get frustrated or mad though, since limited lives aren't really a thing, and checkpoints are pretty reasonably spread out, so if I failed at something, it didn't take long before I could give whatever tripped me up another try. That makes the difficulty a little hard to pin down compared to other Sonic titles since, well, it definitely took me a lot more effort to clear Advance 3. Me needing to redo an entire level because I died 3 times wasn't a thing here. While that might make things sound too easy, I'd argue that your first time through, you're just supposed to kinda stumble through, and come back later for the good scores once you learn the levels and get your moves down more. There were quite a few times that I thought, this would look amazing if I actually knew what I was doing. I watched someone else who had almost 50 hours in the gameplay, and I gotta say, yeah, it does look pretty cool. I've gone back to claim S ranks on a lot of the stages, bosses, and challenges, and while I'm not sure whether I'll be able to pull it off, I also kinda wanna go for the 100%, which I probably wouldn't bother attempting if the game had brutally punished me for messing up an upside down rail change. A few other notes, the boss battles have checkpoints, which while I like in stages, feel a little weird here. There's also a lot of button prompts that pop up. These are helpful sometimes since it's not always clear what the game wants you to do, like sometimes you need to use Chaos Control to take down a specific boss phase, when my first instinct was to try kicking them in the face. Sometimes though, they feel condescending, like when there's a shin-high laser I need to jump over and they remind me what the jump button is, 2 hours in, and I have to wonder how stupid they think I am. And while they sometimes spell things out, there's some attack sequences where I'm not immediately sure whether I meant to strike, combo, mash, hold, or time. But again, since I think most of these are meant to be replayed, a learning process should be expected. To sum things up, I felt challenged but never frustrated, due to the generosity with retries. This allowed me to not just finish the campaign in a reasonable time, but also give me a glimpse of how well I could be playing it, enticing me to give the game a revisit. Or several. Unless you skipped right here, it shouldn't be a surprise that the game is a big recommend for me. While I won't say it's the pinnacle of remakes, it still does a lot to justify its existence. It's a new release of a game that came out long enough ago that plenty of people might not have played it, or just want a more convenient way of doing so, the base experience being pretty damn good on its own. It adds in new content that about doubles the game's length, and while put together, you're still probably looking at under 10 hours playtime. They're fun enough with plenty of challenges and collectibles that it has a ton of replay value. On top of all that, it's not a full price game either, only $50 as opposed to the standard $60. Or $70, which some are pushing as the new standard. I think the $50 is a really fair price for it, and while I think an extra $10 or $12 is a bit much for the DLC, that's optional, so I can't get too mad, even if I personally never will. Wait, what are you doing? Stop! Ah, damn it. Moving on, I could still see some argue that this is too much, but if you love Sonic and are the sort to play this type of game over and over, for rank, for collectibles, or just for the heck of it, I definitely think it's worth picking up whether you still have the original or not. And since likely only Sonic fans are the type to watch this sort of thing, I'm probably preaching to the choir here. So to turn it back to you, what do you think? Do you like the original Generations? Have you tried Shadow Generations? If so, what did you think and which did you prefer? And do you think this remake is worth the price of admission? This one was a little weird to do, it not being as in-depth as my normal reviews, but still a bit more than a first impressions. If you want a proper one done for either campaign, let me know, though I might reuse some stuff if I do. With that, thanks for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into platformers, especially Mega Man. Also, did you notice? I wanted to make a bunch of comparisons to Mario, Bowser's Fury, Splatoon, and even Metroid, but I didn't because everyone else already is. You're welcome.